Good afternoon. This is Dr. Nageshwarakonda, Director, OUCIS, Usman University Center for International Studies, former ASRC. As part of our lecture series, today we have the distinguished speaker is with us. I welcome the participants on OUCIP YouTube channel and also Google Meet platform. As part of the lecture series, the OUCIP, now OUCIS, has been initiating many programs. Today, Professor K.NarasimhaRao, in charge of English and Foreign Language University, and well-known scholar, professor, and head Narasimharao Kedari Garu is the director for IQAC cell, EFLU University. Sir has been publishing a good number of research articles in various national and themes. Right from the beginning, almost for more than 20 years, he has been in academic and research activities. Earlier, Sir worked at Lucknow campus. Now, Sir is the head of the department and work lectures at the prestigious EFLU University, Hyderabad. Now, Sir is the registrar, in charge registrar of EFLU University, and Sir has published good number of research articles on various themes related to English language teaching, Indian writings, post-colonial studies, and also South African literature and Dalit literature. Professor Rao has edited 2 books in ELT, and Professor Rao has developed course content for KL University, Vijayawada, state of Andhra Pradesh. And his textbooks have been prescribed to the UG students. We are very happy to see you, sir, on this occasion. Sir is going to talk on literary aesthetics and cultural responses of the literature during the pandemic times. So I invite you, sir, on behalf of OUCIP and my own behalf, I welcome you, sir, for this lecture series. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Konda Nageshwara Garu, for the kind words and the introduction you gave me. And it is very edifying because it is needed. It is the need of the hour as we are going to deliver the talk on reappraising the literary aesthetic and the cultural responses of the literature of the pandemics. So when you asked me to deliver a talk on OUCIP YouTube channel, I thought that it is of scholarly interest to just interrogate how pandemics and literature and cultural aesthetic obviously have an interrelation. And in my talk, I will make an attempt to reappraise the interrelation between pandemics, society, and culture, and how it is aptly and promptly characterized and dramatized in the literary aesthetic. That's what my argument is. And I will also throw some ample light on what are the various texts. So the Western universities already have evolved this plague literature a long time back, especially in 2012 itself. And now it is the need of the hour that we have pandemics and literature, an area that we can evolve in the universities, in the Indian universities, and we can look at how the interaction between society, culture, and writings and literature is characterized in the literary aesthetic, and also how the culture got a relative impact. And this common subtext, if we just look at the common subtext that we can derive from looking at the various texts, is that pandemics have always dealt a shattering effect on the social and literary ethic. And in the past 2 decades, in a span of 2 decades, the world has been subjected to various pandemics, like almost pandemics and epidemics we can call, like right from 2005, we have swine flu, 2005 we have bird flu, 2009 we have swine flu, MERS in 2012 and SARS in 2013, and Ebola in 2015, and now we have the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020-21. So as a result, we have the cultural phenomena have crystallized in what we can call have come to a kind of a change had happened, and this crystallization can be seen, is reflected in the different fields, and also we can call this a particular era a pandemic era because of this crystallization process of the cultural phenomena. So, especially if you just look at the literary works produced during these pandemic times, right? From I'm going to give you a collection of works like Daniel Defoe's Journal of the Plague Year, and we can also look at Boccaccio's Decameron, which I call it is a remarkable text, and it is we can call a text which is prefatory in nature, especially in the nature of pandemics and plague literature. And right up to 2016, I think even in 2016 we have a dystopian novel which we called Dion Meyer's novel called The Fever. So this is also another. This comes under the dystopian category of science fiction novel. So if we look at the various kinds of text, right from Boccaccio's Decameron up to Dion Meyer's Fever, we have a long list of works which can be categorized under science fiction and dystopian category. But what is this plague literature, and how this plague literature has really affected the literature, culture, and at the same time the society? That's my principal argument in my talk. So, if we just look at the cultural phenomena, how it has been crystallized in what we call this pandemic era, we can say that this crystallization process of the cultural phenomena, the impact on the cultural phenomena ranges from an interest in plague literature, a kind of renewed interest in plague literature, and the cinema of the past. So, if you look at for the past 2 or 3 years, there is a kind of retrospective effect on YouTube sites and the social media universe. So I would like to just touch upon this, the ranging of the interest from a revival of interest in plague literature and cinema of the past to the burgeoning of general books on plagues and pandemics. So this crystallization process of the cultural phenomena has recasted new social and medical outcomes. That's my argument. So not only the social impact, but also the medical outcome. I will also touch upon Hippocrates semiotic in my talk, while looking at this medical outcomes and social outcomes. I'm going to refer to 4 non-fictional works like Heatheny Quinlan's Viruses, Plagues, and Pandemics, and Timothy Caulfield's another famous non-fictional work, which is called the User's Book to Anxiety. And the third one is Snowden's mythological text, which we call what we call Epidemics in Society. So these are the 3 texts on which my talk is going to be based on. So what are these social and medical outcomes, and at the same time, how it shaped the discourses of misinformation? And that's that's a phenomena that we have seen right from the beginning. Whenever a plague hit or a plague broke out at a particular region, or a pandemic struck the world, so we can see this cultural phenomena obviously get a kind of shattering effect. And at the same time, the medical and social outcomes obviously vary. And not only they vary, but they also repeat at the same time. Repetition and variation, we can see in the cultural phenomena. So that's what my argument is in my talk. And there has been a revival, if we just see revival of interest in the literature of the previous forms of culture, not just the literature of the past, especially the plague literature, or textbooks which were written on plague, and also the cinema of the past. But at the same time, there is a revival of interest in the previous forms of culture, the art via retrospective sites on YouTube and social media. So when we look at this argument of how this cultural phenomena and social structure obviously gets a kind of impact, and how they are affected by the pandemics and plagues, 2 key questions arise. According to me, I would like to question, and I would like to pose two questions. The first question is, has the pandemics had transformed the way in which the popular culture is consumed and experienced in any significant way? So has the pandemics had transformed, or has the pandemics has transformed the ways and means in which the popular culture is experienced and consumed in any particular way? That is one. The second important question is, has the pandemics had its effect on the creation of new artifacts, cultural and literary artifacts themselves? So how the pandemics or plague can evolve new cultural phenomena or new cultural artifacts is my question. So these are the two questions I'm going to address with certain conclusions that can be drawn up. So an indirect answer, I would like to draw an indirect answer, and then I will go to my conclusions. An indirect answer seems to emerge when we look at the plague literature of the past. Here, I would like to refer to John Kelly. John Kelly, in his work called The Great Mortality, if you just look at that work, Great Mortality, An Intimate History of Black Death, which was written in 2006, he particularly mentions, he observes that the cultural phenomena, the pandemics induce a radical cultural phenomena or radical cultural changes, obviously leading to new literary and cultural artifacts. So that's my premise. John Kelly's work, The Great Mortality. I take my premise from John Kelly's The Great Mortality, that is An Intimate History of Black Death, which was written in 2006, where he says that pandemics induce a radical cultural change, and at the same time, they also affect new literary and cultural artifacts. Very significant this particular point is, and I would like to take this point and look at Boccaccio's Decameron. Yes, for instance, if you look at Boccaccio's Decameron was written in 1348 or 1348 to 1353. There is a contention on the date of the book, 1348 to 1353. And between this particular period, Boccaccio refers to a plague, a bubonic plague that struck the city of Florence in Italy in 1348. So it is a first instance because Boccaccio has brought out a new kind of docufiction, which it is called docufiction. It is not fiction, and at the time fiction did not evolve. And he wrote a kind of documentary fiction, and that documentary fiction has given out two important what we call literary art forms. One is called dystopian novel, and another is called the science fiction novel. So if you want to refer to science fiction novel, you cannot forget Boccaccio's Decameron. And another important thing is the birth of fiction. The birth of fiction is traced to, as a narrative art, is traced to Boccaccio's Decameron. And the significant thing in this work is while Decameron or Boccaccio portrays the bleak situation in the city of Florence, he also portrays how the 10 young people who spent 2 weeks away from Florence, they cope with the situation, cope with a new situation called the bubonic plague that they did not know. That is in 1348, before the church had rapidly expanded throughout Europe. And at the time, these 10 young people wanted to cope with the situation, and they themselves say that they evolve a technique of storytelling. And the storytelling, the characters themselves say it is a storytelling itself that the characters say that it helps them to cope with the situation and keeping them mentally alive. Very significant phrase this is, keeping themselves mentally alive. So how the pandemic or plague actually affect the people, and it actually affects the mentality, or what we call the mental outcomes. That's what I mentioned in the beginning. It's of the social and medical outcomes. And Hippocrates is the person who said that it is a cultural perception of a disease that often comes in the way of its cure. In order to cure a particular pandemic or a disease, the cultural perception of the person comes in the way. And this is where I was very much astonished while reading, while preparing my notes on this particular talk. So because I'm going to leave several questions and at the same time giving, just as a scholar, as a colleague, as a scholar of interest, along with all of you, I would like to give some responses or replies to the answers to the questions that I am going to evolve in my talk. And what we can look at this Decameron, these 10 young people, they go on telling stories on the subjects of their interest, and that's why it was a new kind of fictional technique that was evolved by Boccaccio in Decameron. And Deca means 10, Meron means stories, 10 stories actually. So these 10 stories on 10 different subjects were told by the 10 young people who spent 2 weeks away from the city of Florence. And the significant factor here is, if you just look at Boccaccio's popularity, I would like to refer to John Colin Dunlop, who wrote History of Fiction. I would like to refer to volume 2, page 352. He says that Boccaccio's popularity is unbounded because there are 3 important techniques that Boccaccio used, and later on this fictional technique has also evolved these 3 techniques at different levels. The first technique that Boccaccio evolved in storytelling is that Boccaccio used the comedic entertainment, whatever the comedic representations or the incorporations in the story technique of these 10 young people. The comedic entertainments that were there, that were prevalent in the Italian society, were incorporated in the work. It was also mentioned by William Robbins in the work called The Case of the Court Entertainer. In the case of the court entertainer, this particular comedic entertainments that were incorporated in the history of in the fictional technique of Boccaccio, that was one important factor. And another important factor is Boccaccio's popularity is unbounded because there are more number of imitators than those of any writer or than those of any author in the annals of literature. Why? The reason is Decameron's structure is different because the structure itself is impacted by the plague at the time. Because the times are dicey, the times are uncertain, and life became even the social and economic factors decided who should live and who should not live in the pandemic, and who will survive and who will not survive in the particular bubonic plague time. And even I will refer to Snowden in this particular factor later on. I reserve my opinion later on. So if you just look at another important factor, the first is what we call the popularity. The second is what I refer to the comedic entertainment. And the third important factor that we can look at is Zwitan Todorov, a great structuralist, has evolved a technique called grammar di Decameron. He evolved a grammar by itself based on Boccaccio's Decameron, and it became a Bible for. It became a model of general structure. Decameron has been used as a model of general structure for all narratives. I think you can look at structuralism by Zwitan Todorov. He's a Russian formalist and structuralist. See the impact of Boccaccio, and if you just look at if we come to the next important text, so the next important text that we can touch upon is Daniel Defoe, who is also called the father of docufiction or the father of fiction. Daniel Defoe's Journal of Eplegia, which was written in 1722. It is a work which is remarkable for portraying the devastation caused by bubonic plague in the city of London. It happened so in 1665. This text was written after 57 years after the plague, but very interesting because whatever Defoe referred to in Journal of Eplegia, the same kind of phenomena we can see now even in the pandemic. That's why, out of scholarly interest, I took this particular topic in order to just intersperse how the cultural phenomena that has been crystallized in the past again got a repetition with a form of variation in the present times. So in Journal of Eplegia, we can see that how Daniel Defoe, he referred to this work called Journal of Eplegia, the devastation caused by bubonic plague in the city of London. And it is remarkable if we just look at the narrative art of Daniel Defoe, that it is a writer's fictional narrative, a personal experience of the writer about the devastation caused by plague, and at the same time, Daniel Defoe's account achieves a verisimilitude of actual diaristic account. Actually, it was a kind of diary, and date by date, in a chronicled way, Daniel Defoe gives out this particular the events that happened during the bubonic plague, that is in 1662, 65. So what happened? What happens if you just look at the account given by Daniel Defoe? He develops a diaristic account about the chaotic events that happened in London 57 years after the plague. It is truly remarkable if you just look at how Defoe's portrayals echo now, even in the present times, because even in the news stories, media casts, and also storylines, that we can see how whatever the kind of Defoe's portrayals. I would like to refer to the surreality that Defoe presents, particularly surreal, are the sham cures. They are all cures which are developed by quacks, the medical practitioners who are duplicate medical practitioners in the form of anti-pestilential pills or incomparable drinks that were developed by these quacks, propagated as the cure of bubonic plague that was rampant in London during these times. So these anti-pestilential pills and incomparable drinks that Daniel Defoe referred to in Journal of a Plague Year, these actually prefigure the kind of what we call the fake news or fake cures that we have on the social media universe, that have been propagated on the social media universe indiscriminately. So now it is very much important that we can look at what are the other texts. I'll just give an aerial view of what are the other texts, because I refer to two important texts. One is of 13th century, that is pre-Chaucerian era, and the second one is what we call the modern era, that is 1772, the 18th century, just before 18th century, the Restoration period. And now we have in Mary Shelley, in the Romantic times, in the Romantic period, we have a text called The Last Man. So the importance of literature as a legacy of mankind has been stressed in Mary Shelley's The Last Man. 1826, this novel was written in. It was written in 1826. So this novel, Lionel Verney is the character, and he was the only survivor of the pandemic, and it is this novel, written by Mary Shelley, is the first major novel to imagine the extinction of mankind by a global pandemic. Though it is dystopian in nature, but I would like to, because of my scholarly interest, I even refer to this, though I don't have any negative approach to the survival of the mankind, because we prevail always, even though in the virulent pandemic or even the devastating wars. So if you just look at how Lionel Verney wants to record a legacy of the mankind, because he finds literature as a legacy a story that will re-explain the survival of the mankind, because he has a profound thought in the mind that the world will be repopulated one day. So that kind of profound hope is expressed in Mary Shelley's The Last Man. The next novel I would like to refer to is Saramago's Blindness. It is a post-apocalyptic evidence of how literature helps mankind to survive, or to survive the tragedies, even personally or even collectively, on a collective front. So Saramago's Blindness, 1995, this novel came out. And Saramago's Blindness, we have the blindness is the disease that affects the mankind. That was a kind of literary imagination that was made by Saramago. And the only character that becomes remains with sight is the doctor's wife. And the doctor's wife wants to read the successful story of mankind to the blind people who survive the disease, the disease of blindness. So now I would like to refer to the genres in pandemic literature before I just give some more important texts before I recount some more important texts for you. So the first important thing that I would like to touch upon is the first category. They look at the disease, the literature of the pandemics. The first category of literature of pandemics, they refer to the diseases like influenza, cholera, and plague, etc. The second category, if you just look at the second category look at the real diseases and the author's personal experience. The author's personal experience, like if you just look at Catherine Annie Potter and D.H. Lawrence, they are affected by the influenza, 1918 influenza, and which is caused by H1N1 virus, the most devastating virus in the modern world. And at the same time, we can take the examples of the personal experiences of the authors, like not only Catherine Annie Potter and D.H. Lawrence, but T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot is a person who said that my brain's powers were affected by H1N1 virus, because after he was affected by H1N1 virus, most of the works are not so appealing and they're not that much inspiring. If you look at the inspiring works of T.S. Eliot, most of the works have been written before 1930 and 1934 and 1930s. So the next important thing I would like to touch upon is a few of these texts. If you just look at these texts, the two categories of texts, we can evolve a conclusion that a few of these texts are located in the past, because I refer to that some of them are imaginary, but some of them are personal in nature, because the author himself experienced a kind of personal experience. If you look at Thomas Wolfe's brother died from H1N1 virus, and he wrote a tragedy based on his brother's death. And even if you look at the work by Edgar Allan Poe, the Red Death, the Mask of Red Death, it is a short story. Read it. It's an excellent short story. So if we just move on to if we just draw some conclusions from these two categories of texts that we have, few of these texts are located in the past, while most of the modern works are located in the future societies. These future societies are these texts are man-made or bioengineered viruses, which fall under two categories. One is called science fiction genre or dystopian genre. So science fiction or dystopian, these are the two categories. And if you just look at one of the important works that were written during 1912, Jock London's the Red Death, the Scarlet Fever. The Scarlet Fever. The Scarlet Fever is a text which was written about a particular kind of fever. I think if you just relate the text, 1912 text, in 2013, the same kind of fever attacked the world. That is in 2013, that is called the Red Death. People call it Red Fever or Red Death. So the entire novel, 1912, Jock London's novel, The Scarlet Death, the Scarlet Plague, it was located in 2073. So how the writer imagines the society, and how I don't have any Nostradamus effect in my mind while I'm referring to this one, and even I don't have any negativity to say that literature can presume what is going to happen in the future. But literary imagination is, I don't doubt the literary imagination of the writers. So some of the works that I'm going to refer to, almost all these works, they refer to what we call a positive effect that literature has its immense impact on the mankind, and culture obviously takes a recourse, and at the same time a new invention is brought out by the pandemic or the plague at staggered intervals, and whenever a particular pandemic or a plague occurs or which hits the mankind, so the mankind evolves a new invention. That invention is very, very remarkable, and at the same time it is outstanding in nature, which changes the entire culture. So if we just move on to the next important thing, the pandemics and misinformation and pandemics in society, how the pandemics and misinformation, pandemics and society go hand in hand. And before I just go into this, I would like to refer to one important text that was, two or three texts which you can also work on if you want to, if you are interested in. So Michael Crichton's 1969 novel Andromeda Strain. Andromeda Strain is a very important novel that talks about a particular microorganism, an extraterrestrial microorganism that was invented in the desert of Arizona. And the second important text that you can refer to is Stephen King's The Project Blue. That is also about a post-apocalyptic text, we can say. Post-apocalyptic text that was written by Stephen King. And the most important text that I would like to refer to here, because it has an existentialist philosophy, Albert Camus' La Peste. La Peste, which was written in 1949. This text is a remarkable text, and I would like to just reiterate my stand that how pandemics or plague, whatever you call, but plague is regional in nature, pandemic is pandemic, means across the world. So the pandemic, how the pandemic affects the literary imagination, we can see in La Peste. La Peste, if you can look at, even though Albert Camus objected to call this particular work an existentialist fiction, but there are famous examples, there are famous instances how Albert Camus took existentialist philosophical discourse and projected onto the realm of storytelling. Because Bernard Rieu is the character, Dr. Bernard Rieu is the character, and who helps the people to survive, who helps people survive in the Algerian city of Oran. So it's a remarkable chronicling event of Albert Camus in La Peste, how a doctor has a social responsibility towards the society, and how he helps the people to survive in an Algerian city called Oran. So the existentialist philosophical discourses were brought, and they were projected onto the realm of storytelling. So this is a very interesting phenomena. And now I would like to draw upon some important non-fictional works to look at the pandemics in literature and how society and culture obviously were impacted, and how we can take literary aesthetic reappraisals of this phenomena of the pandemic affecting the culture, society, and writings. So Heathery Quinlan is, I would like to refer to the non-fictional text called Viruses, Plagues, Pandemics, and Viruses, which is very recent non-fictional text by Heathery Quinlan. Heathery Quinlan throws ample light on how pandemics affect the everyday culture and extant forms of culture, everyday life and extant forms of culture. Interestingly, Heathery Quinlan and her husband were the first American couple, one among the first American couples to be married via Zoom. And if you just look at that, Heathery Quinlan's text is concerned with how culture, writing, and art, how they are affected by the previous pandemics, because this particular text includes sections on Decameron, Canterbury Tales, and Wuthering Heights. And at the same time, another important modern phenomena that had happened in 1990s, Keith Haring's art, pop art, and how Keith Haring's pop art has its impact on literature and society. Because Keith Haring is one of the artists, visual artists, who died of AIDS-related symptoms in 1990 at the age of 31. Keith Haring's art is an aesthetic response, in part, an aesthetic response to the AIDS disease. And the techniques that he used, he drew upon the techniques of the comic book techniques, the elements of the comic book techniques, in order to talk directly and at the same time meaningfully to the contemporary viewers. So in order to have a direct conversation, he used this comic book technique, and he developed a kind of graffiti also. And this graffiti, that's what even Heathery Quinlan says. Heathery Quinlan chronicles in detail how some of the great works that were produced during the pandemic, or how some of the greatest works of literature are inspired by the deleterious effects of the pandemic. Because some of the works, if you just refer to Kafka, Klimt, Schiele, Apollinaire, Georgy Keefe, All these people died of influenza, but all the people worked extensively on what we call the effects of pandemics on the society, and at the same time they gave particular solutions to how the world can be made better, because they are not just artists, but they're thinkers, philosophical thinkers. And Kafka was a modernist thinker who influenced many modern writers, especially writers like William Harris and J.M. Coetzee, and we have George Lamming. All these people were influenced by Kafka. And looking at the influence of the pandemics, the interrelation between pandemics and society and art, we can say that from Quinlan's text, we can therefore assert that pandemics not only illustrate human fragility and weakness, because many people say that during the pandemic human beings become fragile and weak, and it not only projects human fragility and weakness, but also it focuses on, it motivates a kind of literary aesthetic reappraisal, which in turn impact social mindsets. So this is a very important statement that was made by Hilary Quinlan. And what she says is that it motivates us to reappraise the literary aesthetics, which in turn impact social mindsets. So if you take the instance of Keith Haring's pop art. Keith Haring's pop art is an excellent example of how it sparked new gay rights movements. Gay rights movement was actually sparked by Keith Haring's cartoonic art and graffiti, and it can be, and he allowed it to grasp visually. That's what the daring act of Keith Haring is. And if you just look at the Keith Haring's art and the impact of pandemics on literature and art, like say Kafka's works, Klimt's works, Schiele, Apollinaire, Georgi Keefe, all these people. So we can arrive at a conclusion that we can evolve a particular kind of conclusion that pandemics propose two important solutions. One is to reinvent the society, or to have a recourse to the status quo. There are two things: either to return to the status quo or to reinvent the world. So these are the two possibilities that pandemics evolve. And another important thing that we can look at here is memes, the modern internet phenomena. And I would like to refer to this from the point of view of another important writing called Internet Memes as Partial Stories. Internet Memes as Partial Stories, that was written by Saint Laurent, Glavenou, and Littrett. It's a composite work, but it is very influential in when we look at the memes into consideration, because during the pandemic these memes have become very popular, and these memes have come into the social media universe, connecting with the various aspects of the pandemic. And these memes are designed so as to cope with the dangerous and stressful situation, but at the same time they're used as a source of satire and critique. And critique against whom? Against the people in politics, people who occupy the political positions from all parts of the political spectrum. It's not just one country, but in almost every country these memes have emerged. And that's why Saint Laurent and Glavenou says that these people, these internet memes, have come to be conceptualized as partial stories. They reflect, contribute, and capture the social mindsets and wider storylines. So this is the importance. This is the importance of the memes that have come into existence during the pandemic times. So now I'd like to refer to another important non-fictional text by Timothy Caldron. Timothy Caldron, the work is very popular. It was written in 2019 only, when the pandemic is in its offing, and there were certain rumors that in China, in the city of Wuhan, there was a pandemic that is ravaging and that is rampant in nature. And it is called Damn It, Relax, Damn It, a user's guide to the age of anxiety. a very interesting text written by Timothy Caldron. And this particular non-fictional text has the storylines of, has the underlying themes of reducing fear during the pandemic, and also the discourses of misinformation. Very interestingly, this text, though it was written later on, but Daniel Defoe, I would like to refer to the father of representation or incorporation of this misinformation culture is Daniel Defoe. Read this Journal of a Plague Year, it is so interesting, and you won't come out of it almost for 1 week if you read the text. So interesting it is. And Defoe gives an excellent psychological representation or psychological symbolism of the mankind, even though it is in transformation, right from the Restoration period down to the modern period and all to the post-colonial era. The same kind of mindset is there. The social-cultural habitus did not change. That's what we can say after reading the text, Daniel Defoe's text, Journal of a Plague Year. Timothy Caldron says that what he says, he refers to Max Haven, one of the cultural analysts, who said that the cultural phenomena is very important while dealing with a particular disease, because most of the doctors, they only read the symptoms, or they just ask you what is your perception, or what are your symptoms, are you getting fever, like this. But Max Haven says that a particular pandemic throws the human beings who are living during that particular age into a cocooned mind state. We won't come out of it because it is created by the socio-cultural habitus. Because every person is in a particular clout, which is created by, even though we don't know that we have a shield around us, and even though you may claim that you are immune to such kind of socio-cultural habitus, you cannot, because we are living in a society, according to Max Haven. And Max Haven says that this socio-cultural habitus, whatever that creates around us, that creates a kind of cocoon mind state, and we don't come out of it. That's why he refers to Hippocrates and says that is the reason why Hippocrates evolved a particular term called semiotic. Semiotic is a particular term that is not just related to the symptoms of the person, because he is the father of modern medicine. And Hippocrates said that it is not just the symptoms of the patient that a particular doctor has to be concerned with, but the beliefs and perceptions are very important. Because if you have a belief and perception that you cannot come out of the pandemic, or if you cannot move out of it, or if you cannot develop a kind of immunity or resistance, no one can save you. It is a cultural perception that often comes in the way of its cure, says Hippocrates. So beautiful he was. And now, if you just look at Timothy L. Caulfield's remarkable statement, we can also say that we can also reflect the same in Daniel Defoe's text, Journal of a Plague Year. In Journal of a Plague Year, Daniel Defoe refers to the mass panic. That's what the cultural perception I'm referring to. There is a kind of mass panic that is created by the socio-cultural habitus whenever a plague or a pandemic hits or hits the particular region, plague hits the particular region, or a pandemic hits the world. So what this particular mass panic is, it is also represented in 1665. It also has its effect in 1665, bubonic plague time in London. What he says, that the mass panic that was experienced by the common people, and as they tried to come to grips with the bubonic plague, and how this bubonic plague came into their lives without knowing that it was transmitted by flea bites. Because the fleas are everywhere, and they are living with fleas because of the congestion, and at the same time the closer living of the Europe at the time, because London was just like the localities of London were very congested at the time, and because of the congestion also there was a new kind of disease called consumption. Later on, it hit John Keats also, which we today call it tuberculosis. So, without knowing what is the reason for the transmission of plague, there was a mass panic. And Daniel Defoe is one of the first important writers who referred to the misinformation culture during the plague and pandemic. And what is this? Because during those times, there were several quacks. There were several sham cures. Already I referred to the incomparable drinks and anti-pestilential pills that were propagated throughout London as a cure for the bubonic plague that hit London. With all these prevalent factors, we can say that pandemics of the past, we can conclude that, we can derive a particular conclusion that pandemics of the past evolved a kind of social anomaly, and it always created certain social blockades, and it always affecting the diverse cultural representations. So what are these diverse cultural representations? That's what I would like to refer to when I refer to Defoe's and to the other texts like Mary Shelley or even the dystopian and the science fiction genres. Because in the pandemic, there is a kind of blaming culture. And usually in the pandemics, people develop a kind of blaming culture, and they blame everyone and everything for their particular predicament, for their bleak and bad situation. The thing is, what they say that if you just look at the blame is often put on discriminated groups, often described as satanic in nature. And Daniel Defoe also refers to this. And if you just look at Boccaccio's Decameron, in Decameron, the blame is put on heretics, because at the time the church was slowly spreading across Europe, and church evolved a new kind of discourse in Europe, that because of the heretics and members of Jewish faith, the bubonic plague hit, or Black Death hit the Europe. See, the same kind of discourse you can see, though I don't want to refer to a particular country and particular person who propagated this kind of culture, this kind of misinformation culture among the people, among the humankind. But it is remarkable to know that the same kind of echoes we can see in the social media universe now. And I would like to refer to Samuel Cohen's work. If you want to develop your argument on the misinformation culture, this is another particular topic that you can write a paper on. And Samuel Cohen's work, Pandemics, Hates of Disease, Hates of Virus. Waves of Disease, Waves of Virus. So waves of hate and waves of virus. And in this particular work, he refers to the waves of disease, the waves of virus, and waves of hate. Usually, and what happens during the pandemic, during the pandemic, the people often blame the people, and it sparks hatred, and the blame is put on the others. So this is the argument of the entire work, Samuel Cohen's work, pandemics, waves of disease, waves of hatred. And now another important text I would like to refer to in order to bring out another conclusion, that is Frank M. Snowden, Epidemics in Society. A very important text which was written in 2019. Epidemics in Society. This work is very important from the point of view of socio-cultural aspects figuring during the pandemic. The socio-cultural aspects essentially figure in deciding who should survive and who should not in the pandemic. Because now in the current pandemic, you can see more number of people died because of the lack of financial resources or to spend in order to overcome the disease, or in order to recover from the disease, or to pay the medical bills. So the same kind of thing was referred to not just by Frank M. Snowden. Snowden himself took this argument from Boccaccio. Boccaccio in Decameron refers to two important factors. That is, those are, the first important factor is that economic inequities surface during the pandemic or a plague, because he refers to two different parts of the world. One part of the world is represented by the rich people, and the stories that were told by the 10 young characters in Boccaccio's Decameron. These people represent two different worlds in every story. And in every story, we see that the rich people, they have full resources in their home, supplied with wine and food, and they don't have anywhere to go, and they just block the doors, they just shut the doors, and they have very good life within the household. While the middle class people and the poor people, they just wait for death. So the same kind of representation you can see even in most of the novels, like even Mary Shelley's The Last Man, and at the same time even in Fever. So Dion Meyer's Fever. So I would like to refer to here that we cannot. I don't want to miss the mythological factor in the pandemics, in plagues and pandemics, because Frank M. Snowden, after reading Frank M. Snowden's work, being a scholar of literary criticism and literary theory, I would like to relate it to one important factor, Aristotelian factor, hubris, that is called a flaw in the character. What is this hubris? Hubris, I can say that hubris is an obstacle for the mankind in order to prevent future pandemics. We cannot prevent future pandemics because in every human being there is a flaw, and that flaw cannot be overcome. According to I take it from the Aristotelian theory. So this brings into the realm of, I would like to bring you to the realm of mythology, because from the point of view of moralistic approach of criticism, I would like to refer to the moralistic approach of criticism and critical theory. And I would like to relate this pandemics to the literary criticism and theory. So this mythology says that human beings, the hubris is an essential factor that obviously create negative results in human life. Take one human flaw in Hamlet: delay, jealousy, in Othello, envy or jealousy. And the entire epic of Paradise Lost is written only on one trait called jealousy, envy of Saturn. So if you take this hubris into consideration, every human being, we cannot escape the future pandemics, because if at all the hubris is there, and hubris cannot be becomes an obstacle to avoid a future pandemics. And if we evolve, if we just overcome it, I think we can acquire the status of divinity. That's what Aristotelian concept is. And in order to evolve, in order to get this kind of elevation, what Aristotle says, self-realization. That self-realization is nothing but the tragic death that a tragic hero undergoes, which he calls doom. And if you just relate this pandemics, and an excellent example, a classic example of this hubris is the tale of King of Thessaly. It's an interesting story where the king of Thessaly infuriates goddess Demeter. It is a Greek myth that the king called Thessaly, the king of Thessaly, infuriates goddess Demeter by cutting down the sacred trees of Demeter. And Demeter orders that famine should enter into the king's stomach. And the king becomes too much hungry, and he devours everything in the palace. And everyone flees from the palace except only one resident, saving one resident, and he's left with only one resident. That resident is none but his own daughter. He has to eat because he is hungry, and that is the kind of hubris, and that becomes a tragedy for King of Thessaly. An emblematic example I would like to refer to, because I cannot escape this particular example, the tragedy of Edibus. Senecan tragedy, beautiful tragedy that was written in 543. And Senecan tragedy, if you just look at the tale of Edibus, Edibus himself becomes he had a hubris. Without knowing, he falls a victim to his own hubris. His action in haste, activity done in haste, is called the hubris that Edibus had. And that evolves a kind of that eventually results in the tragedy of the king called Edibus. And Edibus becomes the king of Thebes, and he marries Jocasta. And later on, we come to know who that Jocasta was. And he becomes, after becoming the king, entire Thebes is ravaged by an epidemic, and he doesn't know, because he's faced by the epidemic and people are dying day by day. And then Oedipus sends his son, his brother Creon, to the Oracle of Delphi to know what is the reason for the pandemic. And Creon goes to the Oracle of Delphi, and the Oracle of Delphi tells that the person who killed Laius, the king before Oedipus, is the cause of the entire epidemic, or what we call at the time it is called a plague. And Oedipus announces in the kingdom of Thebes that whoever catches that person, he will be executed, without knowing that he himself is the person who killed his own father Laius and married his own mother Jocasta and begot two children, two daughters. And it is an entire tragedy that was a beautiful tragedy that was written by Seneca. After coming to know that Jocasta is his mother, he takes the hairpin of his mother and blinds his eyes. And the Senecan tragedy ends in tears. So if we just look at the what we call the entire, if we want to make a review of what we have discussed so far, it gives every pandemic evolves a kind of new alternatives to human being, to the entire humankind. So it always wants us to seek better and to make our lives better. And that's what the real challenge for the human being is. And at the same time, I would also like to draw another conclusion, that cultural artifacts and literary artifacts are evolved. Because I posed two important questions even in the beginning itself, and I tried to answer. Though my answers are, I cannot give entire a grave solution, a serious solution to the questions that I have posed in the beginning. But it is a factor of grief that I have to end my talk now itself by giving certain conclusions here. That one important thing here is that these new cultural artifacts, these literary and cultural artifacts, are created by the pandemics or plagues that hit at staggering intervals. The first one, if you just look at the literary cultural artifacts, like Boccaccio's new narrative called The Art Form of Fiction. And the second important thing that I can refer to is Keith Haring's pop art. And Boccaccio inspired numerous writers in order to evolve a new kind of fiction called docufiction. So we can evolve two important conclusions. That the first conclusion, that the first important conclusion that we can draw is that the culture that the new culture that evolves during the pandemic would likely not even have been contemplated previously. Whatever that happens during the pandemic is not at all imagined. So a new cultural phenomena happens during a pandemic, and this new cultural phenomena would likely not even have been imagined or contemplated previously. The second important factor is that the second important change that we see in the pandemic is that the new cultural phenomena that evolves during the pandemic, it changes the society, and at the same time it spreads rampantly, it spreads widely, gaining popularity, and changes the culture as a result. So this is what the literature provides the solutions to the pandemics that happen at certain intervals. And this is a very interesting area that we can evolve as a scope of study in literature. And we can also devise a paper. And as I was just referring to certain popular universities in the world, and popular and very remarkable and outstanding universities in the world, which rank among the top 100 in the world, they have already introduced certain papers called Plague and Literature, Pandemics in Literature. And we can also we can also offer a paper to the students based on all these conclusions, and including certain texts which are of science fictional nature and also dystopian nature, so that they will be very much interesting, because pandemics, society and culture have always had pandemics had a shattering effect on the social and cultural ethos. And these are the various conclusions that we can draw. And the culture that evolves after the pandemic is really remarkable. Thank you very much.